David, congratulations on your new book. It's called The Power of Us, How We Connect, Act, and Innovate Together. Before we went live, we were talking about how you wrote that book and finished it in January, and then all of a sudden we found ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, and that set off this wonderful, terrifying 4-month period where you had the opportunity to do a quick update. But it really feels like a book that was written for this period of time. I love this. I want to read a couple sentences from your introduction, because you said that even before, but especially during the pandemic, that you noticed a wave of self-determined, self-organizing activism. The power of us is sweeping over all aspects of our lives. Users of products and services are no longer passively consuming. They're rewriting rules that shape our lives, not least the rules that determine how we're governed. So you go on and talk about smart organizations, smart countries are becoming people-powered. So I'd love to lean into maybe you could tell us the story of the update and the realization that you had come to this beautiful conclusion that felt more true than ever. Did that happen in January?
I guess a little later than that. It was
February. Yeah.
I was doing a training tour in Australia in February, and you know, like many other freelancers around the world, suddenly, you know, gigs started to get cancelled, and I thought maybe I should just get home. And it was in that journey home from Australia back to the UK, which took longer than anticipated, that I just thought this is too big to ignore. You know, it would have been like writing a book in 1944 and not mentioning the war. So
the first chapter of The Power of Us is on context, and it's one of the best summaries of what the heck is happening in the world right now that I've seen. So I really, really appreciate that. Part 2, chapter 2 dives into scalable learning. Maybe you could summarize what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's a part of a quote from John Hagel when he talked about the shift in business from scalable efficiency, you know, getting stuff made as cheaply and as effectively and quickly as possible, to now scalable learning, you know, because organizations have got to be agile and adaptable.
I think you make the argument that it might be the only sustainable competitive advantage of being able to learn more and faster than your competitors.
And some of what was interesting for me, it was almost a kind of acid test of the people that I'd already, you know, researched and visited and spoken to, how they then kind of turned on a sixpence during the pandemic. So what used to be a little craft brewery in Scotland, Brewdog, they suddenly found themselves facing liquidation, and they turned their distillery into making hand sanitizers. They turned their vehicles into delivering meals for those people who were sheltering. And it was a kind of affirmation that the companies that are going to survive are the ones who can adapt to these kind of black swan events and go with the unpredictability of the modern world.
Chapter 3 really gets to the heart of the book. It's on people-powered innovation. What does that term mean?
Well, it really boils down to the fact that I think what we're seeing now is, and I put it in 3 particular contexts, whether it's people who are advocating for new products and services, and I include Greta Thunberg and the March for Life kids in Florida who are, well, they're not kids, who've done such amazing work, or whether it was the ACT UP, you know, movement at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So that's one. Then there are those people who are the tinkerers and the makers who, and Yvon Chouinard at Patagonia is a classic example of that. You know, a rock climber who decided that he could make a better product himself. So he started to do that just for a few friends, and then gradually it kind of evolved. And then there's the people, I guess, who make stuff from scratch. And in those three areas, we've seen a remarkable effectiveness of grassroots networked organizations. So we've seen, for example, more social movements in the past 10 years than we'd seen in any decade for the past 200 years. And, you only have to look at the success of things like Black Lives Matter to realize that, we are now much smarter at advocating for social change, but we also, the smart businesses are the ones who are working with their users, like Procter & Gamble did in Connect and Develop, where they're saying to people, if you've got an idea, come and work with us. Let's share it.
Second part of the book is on mindsets. You talk about two mindsets. What are those?
You could roughly divide the world into users and producers. And most people who work in large-scale organizations would have to be classed as producers. Often, the people who founded that organization would have started off as users, as Apple did. The two Steves were tinkerers, they were hackers, they were part of an open source community, the Homebrew Computing Club, but they made that shift across and they became producers. And the point I'm making in the book is that over time, the user mindset tends to get squeezed out of organizations and the producer mindset dominates. And I'm not making a value judgment that one's better than the other. I think we need to have both.
The next section of the book talks about the operating system. It's a shorthand way of describing how an organization works, the culture, the structure, the systems that collectively either inhibit innovation or enable innovation. Maybe you could quickly describe how organizations either block innovation or how they can promote it.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that in some of our more innovative organizations, a lot of the things that we'd held as sacred for so long, like the hierarchies, like the job description, the person specification, they're all being ripped up. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of organizations. But the kind of buzzword now is holacracy, the flattening of organizations and the move towards working in very flexible teams. And I think that's just a response to the need for, constant innovation within organizations. So I think that operating system, if you can have great users that you're tapping into, but if you've got a clunky operating system, you're not really going to be able to build the kind of culture that you're going to need to thrive.
Part 4 talks about leadership. You argue that it requires very different kind of leadership to enable bottoms-up innovation. Tell us about what that leadership looks like.
Well, it's become something of a cliche now to talk about servant leadership, but nevertheless, it represents that shift from the kind of ego-driven CEO at the head of the organization to a different kind of approach to leadership, which is actually going to ensure that innovation comes up from the bottom. And it was a painful section for me to write because I had to reflect on my own experiences as a leader. I was in a college where I had about 100 academic staff, and I was the CEO who had a million ideas before breakfast. And I'd come in, and I'd say, I think we should try and do this. And after a while, people stopped having their own ideas because they thought, oh, he's going to come in and tell us what we're doing. So what's the point? And Gary Ridge, the CEO of WD-40 company, who I spent a full day with, and it was remarkable to see his approach to leadership. And Gary has this doll that he keeps on his sofa, and he calls it Al, the soul-sucking CEO. And when I asked him to explain what he meant, he just said, well, Al is there to remind me that empathy has to come before ego. If you're leading an organization through ego, then you're not going to get very far.
You have a beautiful summary of the power of us that I want to share. It says, we're witnessing the emergence of ordinary people working together to solve big problems in all aspects of our society, rooted in the communal desire to make the world a better place. And then you give examples of students in organizing these mass protests, of schools achieving great outcomes, committing to diversity and connecting their kids to local problems, co-ops that are generating renewable energy. It's such an inspiring book at such a difficult time where we're facing these cascading crises. Your book doesn't ignore those. It really describes in a lot of detail the pain and suffering that's going on, but it's such a powerful, positive message of people coming together to make a difference. It's one that we deeply appreciate, feels important and timely. Thanks for your book, David.
Oh, thank you, Tom. It's very kind of you to say that.
It's an important book. Everybody should read it. If you're a school head, if you lead an organization, if you're a young person thinking about your way forward, I think for all of you, The Power of Us is a terrific and timely message.
Tom, could I just say one thing about closing, which is at the end, I was searching for a phrase that could sum up the opportunity of this moment. And ironically, I went back to a Brit who ended up being a key figure in American history, Thomas Paine. And this phrase that he coined where he said, "The time has found us." And of course, he was talking about the American independence movement at the time. But I also reflected, my father fought in the Second World War. He was part of the greatest generation. He's the first one to admit they didn't think of themselves as the greatest generation. They had no choice. They had this crisis that they just had to find a way through. I think for our young people now, they could be the greatest generation. They could be the people who take these problems that have been building for decades and they help us rethink the world. And I genuinely hope that the time has found them.